We are the Game Frights.
Mr. Jones was a great painter. He could paint anybody perfectly down to the very last detail. The only problem was nobody was quite sure how he did this, since Mr. Jones is blind. But anybody who came by his house with $50 he would gladly paint. So one day, a little boy by the name of Timothy walked down to Mr. Jones's house, $50 in hand, knocked on his door. After a little while, Mr. Jones answered with his cane. The little boy said, hello, I'd like to be painted, please." Mr. Jones said, "All right, come on in." The little boy followed Mr. Jones into the back room where he painted everybody and sat on the stool against the back wall. Before Mr. Jones started painting him, he turned to Timothy and said, "Now, I must warn you, sometimes I paint a little too far forward." The boy was confused as to what he meant by this. He thought, well, maybe instead of painting the wall behind me, he paints the lawn instead. Something like that. He wasn't quite sure. But he shrugged it off and went along. Mr. Jones started painting him, and Timothy couldn't help but notice that the whole time Mr. Jones had his eyes shut. He figured, well, maybe he has another way of seeing me. After a little while, Mr. Jones said, "All right, the painting's done." So Timothy got off the stool and walked over and looked at the painting. Sure enough, that was him, perfectly painted down to the very last detail. It looked beautiful, except that Timothy was laying on the ground with his neck cut open. Timothy turned to Mr. Jones and said, Why would you paint something like this? This is awful." Mr. Jones turned back to him and said, "I told you, sometimes I paint a little too far forward."